So welcome everyone. I'm Katrina Grant. I'm a research fellow in visual understanding at the University of Sydney, and I'm also an adjunct fellow at the Humanities Research Centre at the ANU. So I'm wearing that hat tonight. We've got a slight change to the panel tonight as Kylie message is unable to chair. So I'll be doing my best to step in and be a chair as well as the first speaker. So please be patient with me if I'm not quite up to speed, but we've got a really great panel tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the different research and work that my colleagues have been doing. So to start, I'm talking to you today from Canberra, which is Ngunnawal and Ngambri lands. And I'd like to acknowledge their elders past and present and acknowledge this land was never ceded. And also to extend a welcome to any Indigenous or First Nations people who are joining us tonight. Also, thinking about our topic tonight, which is national museums, I'd like to also acknowledge that although we don't have an Indigenous speaker on the panel tonight, that our colleagues, our Indigenous colleagues, our First Nations colleagues play a significant role and do a lot of work within this sector, and often carry quite a large burden of responsibility and have a lot of demands put often upon them for expertise and community building and communication, but also to acknowledge that museums can also be difficult places. They've played a role in the history of colonisation and nation building, which can be a really difficult history to confront. And to acknowledge that I, myself, and us as a community have still a lot of listening to do. We have conversations to keep having and actions to keep taking to kind of keep moving that cooperation forward. But I'd also, in the spirit of today and Museums of the Future, to acknowledge that a lot of the really exciting new work and exhibitions that I've seen that have been curated by Indigenous colleagues around Australia and internationally, which are showing us new ways to value and critique and engage with material cultures, with landscape, with place and with history. So welcome. Thank you to Kylie and also to Melinda from the Humanities Research Centre for bringing us together tonight and getting this organised. Before we get underway properly, a little bit of housekeeping. The structure tonight is that we'll have 15 minutes from each speaker and then a bit of time for questions at the end. So if you've got questions during each talk, you're very welcome to pop them into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll keep tabs on that, and we can come back to those at the end of the talks. So I'll briefly just introduce our panel today. As we get to each talk, I'll introduce them in a bit more depth, but just hopefully appearing in order as they appear to me on my screen. We've got Tammy Nguyen, who is the head of operations at the Vietnamese Museum of Australia. We've got Pan Luo, who is from the Chinese Museum of Ethnology, and Professor Christina Kreps from the University of Denver, Colorado, who's also in Canberra at the Humanities Research Centre as a fellow at the moment. So to start us off as chair, hastily stepping in as chair, but just to sort of set the scene very briefly, the reason for the event tonight is International Museums Day, which is coming up on Saturday. I think it is Saturday, the 18th of May. And the focus this year is on museums for education and research. And so when I saw this, I think I messaged Kylie and said, oh, we should make sure we do an event for International Museums Day, because it's one of the topics that both of us, in a way that brought me and Kylie together as researchers, was our interest in the role that museums play within our research as a topic of our research, and also particularly in terms of the collections that form around research, so the collections you find at universities that have been formed around research, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And when I was trying to think about what to talk today, because Kylie just said to me, I'll talk about national museums in Australia, which is a slightly broad topic to cover in 15 minutes. And I was thinking, even if I bring that in and just focus on what's happening in our national cultural institutions in Canberra, I could I could probably fill 15 minutes just with reflections on each one of those cultural institutions and the challenges they're facing and the sort of future directions that they're going in. And I sort of, so yeah, I was struggling a little bit to think, how do I focus myself into a topic tonight? And I thought, well, maybe because, I know our audience out there in Zoom land is a mix. I know some of you are probably researchers like me, and others are maybe working in the sector, and others have jumped in because you're interested to hear. And I thought, well, maybe I'll talk a bit about some of the detail, the sort of nitty gritty about what I actually do what do I do when I say I research with a museum? What is it? What is it that I'm up to? Because some of it's a bit sort of unexpected and a bit ad hoc sometimes. It's not always the smooth process that it is when we present it in a properly published paper. So I guess to sort of introduce myself a bit more, I'm been working in and around museums for the last 2 decades, I suppose, as a student first and then as a researcher, as a lecturer. I trained as an art historian. So initially, my engagement with museums was very sort of, I don't know, how would I frame it? It was I would go to a museum and I would take what I wanted, in a sense. I would think, I'm working on this topic and I need to go and look at these works of art, or I need to go and find this material in an archive. And I would sort of take those ideas, take those images away with me, and I would sit down and write on my own and write up articles and research. And so I was sort of working on the collections, but I was never really working with the museums directly. I would maybe get help from a curator to access part of a collection, or get some advice about where to find something from an archivist. But I wasn't really having conversations with the people in museums about what did their work look like? What was it they were working on? What was framing the way that they worked? And it wasn't really until I moved, when I came to the ANU, my previous role about 7 years ago. I was in an interdisciplinary centre of digital humanities research, and even though I had a much broader remit than museums, it was that really brought me into a much closer collaborative role with collections. And so I worked a lot in Canberra, sort of co-teaching and working with the national collections. And I think it was sort of this work through teaching and through going in, sometimes sort of being invited in to make a 3D model or something of a collection, that I became kind of much more interested in the work that people within museums were doing, and thinking about how that sort of ecosystem, how that culture of collaboration and research happened within the museum as well as within academia. So I'm going to talk about 3 sort of, I suppose in some ways in my mind, they're sort of slightly modest projects. They're certainly not big multi-year funded projects that I've done that have opened up some of these stories about collections. And so the first one I want to talk about, which this is a project I did with Kylie over we finished it up last year, but we really did it in 2022, which was, we called it the Timber Detective Agency, and it ended up, its final form was as a podcast, as a series of sort of conversations with people who work in collections. But the impetus for this was all the weird collections that were at the Australian National University. So the collections at the ANU are quite hidden. There's no big flashy museum. They're mostly tucked away in places like this in a classroom. And so this wood library, a Zolarium, was the prompt for this. So we sort of discovered that it was there. It's tucked away in one of the older buildings at ANU, and it's literally bookcases, and every book is a piece of wood that is labelled. And we sort of thought, like, what is it for? Like, why does it exist? It's beautiful. Like, to us as people who are interested in visual cultures, it was this beautiful object. But to the people who worked with it, it was also this practical object. And so it was used for teaching biology students. It was also used for doing things like detective work into investigating illegal logging and identifying driftwood and remains of boats that washed up on beaches around Australia. And so we found that just by asking about a set of objects that existed at the university, we uncovered all these sort of incredible stories. And that included also looking at things like the heritage furniture collection, which is found, I think Claudia here, who was working as a curator on it, was stacked up in an old animal research facility in the countryside around Canberra. And that this was a beautiful collection. If you love mid-century furniture, it's fantastic. But it also told this story of the kind of aspirations of the university to be this modernist, forward-looking university that actually created a furniture studio to build all its own furniture. They didn't just order it in, as we do now, off catalogues from a big box store. And also these wooden pianos that are in the School of Music. And this is one that's actually hidden away in the vanity chest. And so these are all just up in a classroom in the big concrete Brutalist School of Music that's on the grounds. And so through this process of trying to create a podcast, which was a learning experience in itself, we uncovered all these different stories from kind of furniture restorers who were working closely with the collection to people like this guy, Matt Brookhouse, who helped identify the wood used in the collection, but was also, is also an academic teaching in the forestry school. So yeah, this was one way that we actually dug in. And really a lot of this was me poking around and asking questions and asking often what seemed like really stupid questions about the collections. It wasn't really me as an expert in my own domain. It was me as sort of investigator and student, in a sense, sort of finding out what my colleagues were up to. Another project I want to talk quickly about is teaching with museums. And so this is what really got me working with the National Museum of Australia, was that they'd come to me and said, oh, we're wondering about how should we sort of engage with new digital technologies? This is before COVID. How do we use the online space to engage with school students particularly? And after a bit of back and forth, it's sort of we came down to is I said, well, I've actually got a group of students who need a focus for learning about new digital technologies. So why don't we give them this problem and say, okay, here's the museum, here is its collections, here are the stories the museum wants to tell. So how would you tell them in the online space? What would appeal to you as a, mostly they're sort of young 19, 20-year-olds. They come from all over Australia, they come from all over the world. So they've got a really diverse set of ideas. And they came up with really unusual creative ideas to promote the collection. And it actually even though it was a digital course, we spent so much more time in the museum, in the collection, and talking to the curators than I often have when I've taught sort of museum studies proper or art history proper. We were in the conservation studios. In the bottom corner here, you can see two students photographing a melted foam box. So this was part of the bushfire collecting at the National Museum. And they created a 3D model of this melted foam box to share online. So students come up with ideas about making a podcast about the history of blue poles. There's Jackson Pollock painting, which there was a huge scandal about in Australia when it was purchased in the 1970s. And the students went and interviewed, found curators and found historians and interviewed them. And also games. I had a student, an engineering student, Thomas, who created this snowy hydro game. So it was sort of match the engineer, and then once you matched the engineer in a who's who game, you'd get to find out something about them. But he built the game, he sort of designed it and did the illustrations, but he also went off to the National Archives and found real stories about the people who'd actually worked on the Snowy Hydro scheme. And so this, for me, it was great fun to teach, but it also forced me to think about a lot of different ways of how you might actually work collaboratively with a museum when you're thinking about these kind of digital futures, because a lot of stuff about, and I'll move on to my sort of final point, but like a lot of conversations about technology and digital futures in museums are often dominated by the kind of big story. AI is the big one at the moment. And a lot of them are driven by, profit-driven capitalist tech companies. But that's kind of not, it's not the ethics, it's not the culture that a lot of museums are working around, that they might have less money, less funding for this. Their mission goals are different to those of a kind of venture capitalist or a Silicon Valley company. And so something that I've been working with colleagues and students is thinking about these communities of practice around creating digital objects where we can have really sort of honest conversations about the challenges and the goals that we're aiming for, and actually learn off each other, like not feel self-conscious about the things that we don't know or we don't understand about a collection, or that we don't understand about the technology, and to come up with sort of new ideas. And so we did this in a little project with the National Museum last year, me and a student, Angel, who you can see there in the centre, created these 3D, hang on. Right, my slides are frozen, that's right. Created these 3D models of these convict love tokens. So these really little coins, and they were destined for a travelling exhibition that's been in regional libraries around Australia. And the idea was the tokens went out in the exhibition, but the idea was also to have a 3D model so people could zoom in and they could read the inscriptions and see both sides. And this was really a case of we did so much trial and error. We were down in the conservation studio taking photos and then having to go back and take more photos because the first set didn't work. Yeah, but this was sort of a really successful project, and but I will leave my examples there and I will pass on to Tammy. So I will just stop sharing and let Tammy share her slides. And I will just, while she does that, I will just introduce her. So Tammy Nguyen brings a wealth of experience from both business and community service arenas, spanning over 15 years in the field of forensic use. And you've got forensic use AOD, and I realise I'm not quite sure what AOD is, so you might have to let us know. And a decade in entrepreneurship. So she's here today, and we're really excited she's agreed to come and talk to us because she's leading the charge in establishing Australia's first Vietnamese museum. So Tammy serves as the head of operations at the Vietnamese Museum of Australia. And she's sort of leading the charge, as I understand it, in sort of understanding and honouring the diverse narratives of the Vietnamese refugee diaspora. So thank you, Tammy, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight, and to Kylie for the invitation. It's an absolute privilege to be part of a panel with such amazing powerhouses. I suspect that my presentation may be a little bit different. I'm not an academic or an expert in the museum space. I guess just someone who's has a story and very passionate to see the establishment of the Vietnamese Museum Australia. And I also want to acknowledge my beautiful colleague, Kim, who I think has jumped online in a show of support. So hi, Kim. Thanks for joining us. So yes, the Vietnamese Museum Australia will be Australia's first Vietnamese museum to showcase and preserve the stories of the Vietnamese refugee diaspora here in Australia. But before I start, I tell this story and I want to set the scene a little bit about why this museum is important. If I don't know what the age group of our audience and our attendees here are tonight, but if we want to rewind back to say 1981, there was lots of things happening in the world. Here in Australia, I think one of the biggest headlines at the time, if you go and do your homework, what was happening in 1981 in Australia, Linda Chamberlain was all over the media, you know, a missing baby and, you know, dingoes and whatnot. And while this media frenzy was happening here in Australia, there was a young couple in Vietnam fleeing in the dark in the middle of the night with two very, very young children. And they had snuck out to meet a group of other people who at a pre-arranged destination where they had hidden a boat and where they had scurried away fuel for over quite a period of time because they didn't want to alert authorities that they were, you know, stacking up fuel. And in the darkness of night, they carried their two children onto this little boat with another 40 people, and with other children as well. And all the children were sedated on this boat so that they wouldn't make noise to alert the authorities. And this family and this boatload of people escaped Vietnam because I think everyone knows, you know, there was the Vietnam War going on. There was a whole lot of atrocities. Persecution was occurring. The husband from this young family was part of the South Vietnam Army, and so had been captured, had been imprisoned, and had been sent to a re-education camp, and managed to get out and decided for the safety of his young family that he would get on a boat and escape. One of those young babies was me. Wind back, you know, in 1880, and the other child was my sister. And it's stories like these, and I've just summed it up very quickly, you know, because I'm mindful of time, but it's stories like these, and there's thousands of stories like it, of people here that have come to Australia under very similar, well, we have similar stories, very unique stories at the same time. And these stories are so important because they tell, you know, like all museums, I think it's a snapshot in time. And I think often museums pride themselves on truth telling and history. I think, you know, I can't remember who said the quote, but history is always written from the perspective of the victor. And unfortunately for the South Vietnamese people, we weren't victors. And so our truth is not being told. For a lot of people, you know, our history has been erased and that we are traitors for leaving the country, or defectors, or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, there's a little bit of a context as to why this museum is so important, because we want to preserve all of those stories of all of those people who have made the journey to come across and now call Australia home. So maybe we'll just move on. So a little bit about the VMA. The vision of the VMA is to honour the journey of freedom and the contributions of the Vietnamese community to the fabric of Australia. This has been a dream of the Vietnamese community for at least 20 years. Next year in 2025 will be the 50th anniversary of Vietnamese settlement in Australia. But this museum has probably been an ambitious dream for decades, and only now is it becoming a reality, basically, through a group of small, you know, community people had this amazing idea and then had been lobbying and working behind the scenes, and now it's actually coming to life, basically. But the mission of our museum is to leave a legacy of the Vietnamese refugee stories and their histories, so that the next generations can honour their past, but also have a sense of identity. Because I think for a lot of people with dual, with dual nationalities or growing up with generational differences, identity is really important. to record and exhibit and educate through living artefacts by preservation, interpretation, and inspire people that come after. We want to inspire people by learning about the amazing stories of the Vietnamese boat people, and to persevere through adversity, and to remain resilient. And I think in today's current climate, now more than ever, it's so important to really highlight that point. And we want to be a beacon for the Vietnamese community of Australia and its broader non-Vietnamese community as well. So I'll be really quick. So there's lots of social and economic benefits of having this museum built, but we want to, we believe that it will enrich the cultural richness of the community. It'll provide a space to meet. There's going to be community spaces, so you can have events, you can have counselling services, and it can be used by the whole community, not just the Vietnamese. We want to bring vibrancy to the local area, and it will also, and touching on what Katrina said, we want to use it as an educational centre as well, and so that people can learn about the history and how the Vietnamese have kind of shaped a part of Australian history, including the involvement of the Australian veterans in there. And we want to protect and preserve and maintain a collection of artefacts and stories of the Vietnamese refugee diaspora, which is really important now more than ever because of through the passage of time, that first generation of Vietnamese boat arrivals are aging, and we are starting to lose some of these people. We want to make sure that they are documented so we don't lose them to time. It'll create a lot of jobs and a lot of economic benefits. We anticipate up to 33,000 visitors annually, and it'll provide, I think, about 300 jobs during the construction stage and about 6 full-time jobs, plus volunteers and contractors post-construction when we're operational. There's been a lot of support for the project. We're really fortunate to have the bipartisan support of both state and Commonwealth governments. This is the largest investment in a multicultural project to date, which is a massive thing. It's a burden to shoulder at the same time, but it's huge. And we're the 6th museum in the Multicultural Museums Victoria Network, along with our friends at the Hellenic Museum, the Jewish Museum, the Museum of Chinese Australian History, the Islamic Museum, and Coesit Museo Italiano. The Vietnam veterans are all for this project, and we have a lot of community support. I won't go through governance, but we do have a board of directors, and we have an advisory board. Lovely Kylie is on that, and we also have an exhibition advisory board too, who are helping those like me who are not museum experts or in this landscape, help us build and shape our exhibitions and how to best tell these stories, and how, there's so many narratives. And I think what the introduction that Katrina introduced before is really true. I'm really invested in how there's so many diverse narratives. We've been here for 50 years. We do, and one of the challenges, I guess, that we face is how do you honour history and preserve those stories, but not have our head facing backwards? And how do we embrace and celebrate, the involvement of the younger generations and what we've done? And I often say it, growing up in a very Caucasian white suburb where, one of very few Asian children around, I never would have imagined the words like pho and banh mi would be like the norm in everyday English language. So, finance, I won't bore you guys with the details, but it's approximately a $20 million build. And we've been really fortunate to have support from both the Victorian government and the Labor and Liberal Commonwealth governments, as well as a lot of community fundraising, a lot of community support. We will be based in Sunshine, so we hope to start construction in Q4 of this year. I don't know if I've got a map. Oh, there's a map. We're at 21 Durham Road in Sunshine, which falls within the city of Brimbank. And it's a really great location. Like, Sunshine's a great location. It's probably one of the biggest areas with Vietnamese demographic, and in fact, multicultural, a very multicultural demographic there. But it's one of the largest communities with Vietnamese people in Sunshine. And by just recording and collecting and preserving our history, the Vietnamese Museum Australia will attempt to showcase history and you know and how do we to intertwine history and storytelling into one place. It'll be a place for history, it'll be a place for remembrance and community, but it's also how I like to see it. It's about the past, present, and the future. How do we shape this future? And because we are not established yet, it's yet a question how we do that. And seeing, you know, I'm really keen to see the other museums and the other panelists this evening talk about digital futures and what it means in education and museum landscape. These are the timelines. It's a bit delayed now. We've had a few delays thanks to COVID and a few other things, but we do hope to open the museum in 2026. We did have ambitions to have it ready to celebrate or commemorate rather the 50th anniversary of Vietnamese settlement here in Australia, but unfortunately, due to, you know, every good construction project has delays, and unfortunately we are unable to meet that that milestone, but we will make sure we commemorate it in other ways. But we anticipate to open our doors in 2026, which sounds like a long way away, but in terms of the work done, I'm actually panicking a little bit because it's not that far away. Here, I just wanted to share some of the renders, the beautiful renders of the space and what it looks like that has been done by our wonderful architects Concept. And these are actually the most current renders, and we've tried to incorporate lots of different factors into it. Like, so even the building itself, we want to tell a story. The colour is meant to symbolise the terracotta or the ochre of Australian soil, of Australian earth, and each of those panels are is to represent, to symbolise bamboo, which is, you know, a national plant of Vietnam and is used in construction. It's used in food, it's used in so many different things. So we've tried to incorporate, you know, all of those features into it as well as the towering waves to symbolise the journey, the treacherous journey that so many people had across the, you know, the oceans. But that's us sort of in a nutshell. Stop sharing my screen and I'll return back. And if there are any other questions later, I think we're doing questions at the end, I think, aren't we, Katrina? So, but I just wanted to share that story, and I really wanted to encourage, you know, our attendees and participants to come, you know, go onto our website and you'll find out a little bit more about this project. It really is a historical project. It's the first of its kind, I think, in the world. We thought that there were some smaller museums in the US, Vietnamese museums, but we've spoken to a few museum people from the US, and there is no public museum that tells the Vietnamese story. So there's a few private collections and a few sort of hodgepodge, but nothing to this extent that will be researched and curated and presented as a public museum that can educate the wider community too. So really excited, really excited for our community. It is a massive win, I think, for multicultural communities as a whole, and I can't wait to open the doors to all of you in 2026.
Great, thank you, Tammy. So exciting, I think, and so such an exciting thing to be able to create for the community, to actually create a museum, not just to curate sort of a collection that already exists, but to actually, you know, offer this completely new space for new conversations and new histories that I'm sure, you know, even for people like me who've grown up in Australia, there's still so much to learn about that history, and the museums are often the place where we do that learning, you know. So thank you. And so again, if you do have questions, so pop them in the chat. So we'll move on to our next speaker. So Dr. Pan Luo works as an associate professor in the Department of Research at the Chinese National Museum of Ethnology back from 2014 and until now. So she received her doctoral degree in 2011 from the Chinese University of Hong Kong with a major in anthropology, and her research priorities include museum anthropology, the history of ethnographic museums in China, cultural heritage and spatial strategy. She's also an exhibition interpreter, and her research publications include articles and book chapters on the history of ethnographic museums in China, heritage, and urban space in Guangzhou. And yeah, since 2024, she's been a member of the board of directors of the China Association for the Protection of Ethnic Minority Cultural Relics and deputy director of the Professional Committee of Cultural Heritage and Anthropology. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you everyone for coming, and sorry for my quite long bio. Well, thank you for being here online. And today I'm going to introduce something that we're trying to do in a National Museum of Ethnology in China in the context of creative economy in the development of mutual understanding. And this is my title on the screen. And so first of all, I'm going to begin with some background information. Okay, so what does ethnic minorities mean in China? I think that's a kind of like a background information. China, you know, as a united multinational state, is composed of 56 cultural ethnic groups, and Han Chinese are known as a majority. In addition to the Han majority, 55 ethnic minority groups were officially recognized before 1980s, I think. So this is a classic picture about China's ethnic minorities. I guess the first impression of this picture is always their costumes. And what is Chinese National Museum of Ethnology? This is a very important question for today's topic. The Chinese Museum of Ethnology was proposed by anthropologists in I think in the very beginning in the 1920s, but then in the 1956, Fei Xiaotong, who is often referred to as the one of the father of Chinese anthropology, he suggests to create a new type of museum that combine the collection, study, and display of the lives of Chinese ethnic minorities in Han Chinese, which is different from a museum of ethnology in Europe or North America. Central to Fei Xiaotong's vision about this national museum was the phrase, at least below, that 你中有我，我中有你, which can be roughly translated as you within me and me within you. So, but anthropology was demonized since the 1950s because its relationship with the Euro colonialism, you know, for quite a long time, museum of ethnic minority, all the museums that collect ethnic minority cultural relics was developed only for political propaganda purpose, rather than as an exploration of anthropological ways of understand the war or understand different cultures. Among the same time, I mean, the proposals of building a permanent display space for the Chinese National Museum of Ethnology had been delayed until 1984. So here I list the functional role of the Chinese National Museum of Ethnology that after it was established. Now we don't still have a permanent space for displays, but that's the functional role that's been listed here. For quite a long time, how would ethnic minorities been normally reinterpreted? Most exhibitions on ethnic culture in China was being criticized for its codified in homogeneous series of display techniques. Here from these pictures that you can see how traditional costumes always based on identical mannequins. In these exhibitions, the emphasis is on presenting the 55 groups are fixed in enduring facts exemplified by difference of ritual, art, food, and in particular, the traditional dress. So you might witness that these original anthropological missions, as outlined by Fei Xiaotong, have been lost for a very long time. So how to challenge the false impressions of ethnic minorities and to make innovations of ethnic clothes exhibition become more difficult, and I guess it's more important. Yeah, you can see through the pictures that is all these exhibitions are in different provincial levels, actually Museum of Ethnologies. So since 2016, the Museum of Ethnology has begun to use tradition at present as a stream to make a series of exhibitions with the aim to improving understanding between different ethnic groups. And we start with exhibition of ethnic costumes because it's so important and it looks so different. On the left is the poster from the first exhibition. It was held in 2016. And on the right is the poster of this year, which will be open the day after tomorrow. So I'm now in Kunming for this exhibition. Yeah. So this exhibition is structured around 4 interchangeable units of time, space, craft, and contingent. The time sections explore costumes that represent key milestones in a life, but also the cosmology narratives about the origins of different ethnic groups, such as clothing from different age groups, like dress codes of different occasions that kind of like the rules we still need to obey among all the people. And this picture shows 3 costumes in which tells the story of the particular community's ancestors. Like some ethnic groups believe that their ancestors were birds, and some believe that they were a hero from in a very, very long age before. The second unit discusses the relationships between dress and space, which is common to human dress, basically all over the world. Firstly, the clothing itself is spatial in that clothing developed from hand-woven clothes is typically flat in 2 dimensions, so as not to waste material with cutting. When it was worn, it became like 3 dimensions it formed a space like a soft sculptures. Secondly, and the clothings are also shaped by spatial environments in which the makers lives in. They use natural materials available to them, like people use a fish skin, like people use all kinds of different materials. Yeah. For example, the salmon skin was being used in the I think it's the northeast part of China. Some ethnic minorities, they use salmon skin to make their clothes. They also use the clothes, the costumes to represent their cosmology. Yeah, so I think it's quite common among different ethnic groups. I think it's quite common among people all over the world. The third unit of this exhibition explores how clothing is made by different materials in the process involved in their production. This unit promotes the visitors to think a very important question. Is there really such a big gap between so-called tradition and modernity, like modern clothing or fashion, all these things that we wear today? Rather than attempt to fit these items, like these ethnic customs into big history narrative of Chinese dynasty, the anthropological perspective focus on the micro cosmic, like clothing, food, art, and living condition, which regards as some of the key indicators to understand the living condition in cosmology of different groups of people. Emphasis on the local is key to adoption of an anthropological perspective, and this reflects in the fourth unit. We described it as the laboratory for localization. We developed this unit since the 2016. Now we use this exhibition was traveled to 6 different cities. Each time the fourth unit will involve different designers, and it will change in order to reflect interest in points of the reference relevant to the local audience. So what are we trying to do as anthropologists in this kind of museum of ethnology? We make this exhibition a touring exhibition. It is actually in attempt to present a different narrative about ethnic groups in China rather than grand narrative. We try to provide an anthropological perspective, and we try to make the audience understand that the current living condition of different ethnic groups. We try to provide a feel sense to make the invisible life of different groups, and to make people understand that the cultural diversity, which was been buried by grand narrative or been kind of overemphasized by the different ethnic customs. We also hope to give our audience some new impression that ethnic culture is not frozen in the past or in the museums, that we actually have a lot of things in common. We try to emphasize that all these clothings that we wear, no matter now or from the very very long time before, we actually share the common ideas. Like we share the common ideas of using different dressing codes to different occasions, and we still use the clothing to make ourselves comfortable. Like we wear some particular clothes to emphasize who we are, like to emphasize our personal characters. Yeah, that is kind of like a common rules of customs. Yeah. So this exhibition has a dialogic nature. It seeks to bring past, present, and future together in a dialogue. It can be seen in its fusion together of the display aesthetic of contemporary fashion with anthropological narrative perspective. All these designs would traverse the future while it finds its ethical stand in occasion of its own past, like what I mentioned from Fei Xiaotong's face, that you within me and me within you. So we are planning a series of exhibitions on the same theme and the tradition at present, like food, music, craft. So this is our way to make exhibitions toward a mutual understanding. So that is my presentation for today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. It's really great to get an insight into an exhibition that's just about to open, and to see, I think you illustrated so wonderfully with those images, how that enormous shift in the look of how the display has changed. So thank you. And I will move on now to our last speaker for the evening. Professor Christina Kreps is Professor of Anthropology and Director of Museum and Heritage Studies at the Museum of Anthropology at the University of Denver in Colorado in the USA. And she's been conducting research on museums and museological behaviour for more than 3 decades in Europe, Asia and the US, and has participated in several community-based museum and heritage projects in Indonesia and Thailand. And her publications include Pragmatic Imagination and the New Museum Anthropology, Museums and Anthropology in the Age of Engagement and Liberating Culture, Museums Curation and Heritage Preservation. So thank you very much, Christina. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Katrina, and to the other panelists. It's been so interesting to see what you're doing in the beautiful, beautiful museum, Dr. Pan. That's gorgeous. And also the new Vietnamese museum. And as far as I know, Tammy, I don't think there is a museum specifically devoted to Vietnamese on any kind of level beyond maybe just a very small community museum. So yeah, it's, you might be the first. And so what I want to thank Kylie, I don't know, for inviting me to participate in the panel today in observance of International Museum Day, and devoted to this theme of unlocking knowledge, museums for education and research. And what I'm going to do is pretty different from everyone else. For one thing, I don't have a PowerPoint. And so you're going to have to just bear with me talking and looking at my notes. And I'm not focusing on national museums, which because in the United States, that's kind of a animal we don't really have so much other than the Smithsonian complex. That is the National Museum, and that's it. You know, there aren't many national, because we don't have a Ministry of Culture. There's not any, so the Smithsonian actually is a kind of stand-in for a Ministry of Culture. So it's a very different structure and politics and funding structure in the United States for museums that it is in most other countries. And so it's we don't tend to talk about national museums in the way, you know, that you would hear or in China. And so I'm going to instead talk about you know, speaking to this theme and the role of university museums, and in particular anthropology museums, in fostering cultural understanding and engaging with humanity's current and future challenges. And as a case study, I would have focused on the University of Denver Museum of Anthropology's work, particularly in the arena of international cultural exchange and collaboration. And so it is a departure from the kind of orientation, and I think that's good because it underscores the differences that I'm trying to emphasize and the need for international exchange, like we're engaging in right now. So, as the director of the Museum of Anthropology and Museum and Heritage Studies program at the University of Denver in anthropology for over 20 years now, I've been particularly concerned with using the museum and the program as platforms for not only advancing knowledge, understanding, and respect for global cultural diversity, but also for museological diversity, understood in the simplest of terms as the different ways people care for and sustain their culture. And so in my research and teaching and professional work, I have seen cultural and international exchange and collaborations as a crucial means of creating awareness of this museological diversity, but more importantly, diversifying museum practices to account for the many different ways people know, are in relationship with, take care of, and value their tangible and intangible cultural heritage, both inside and outside of the museum. And I think we've already seen a few examples of this museological diversity in Dr. Pan's case and Tammy's, and also Katrina with some of your examples too, of the different ways people are just using collections and representational strategies and so forth. So I have been involved, as noted in the introduction, in numerous international museum development and training programs in Indonesia, in Thailand, Vietnam, and Europe. And I've also hosted at the University of Denver international museum professionals and researchers from Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Egypt, and Italy. And I've probably left somebody out, and sorry for that if I have. And so over the several decades now, I've been able to assess the value and many benefits of international cultural exchange and collaborations, as well as their long-term and impacts and the ripple effects they can have, at least to a certain degree, you know, within my own capacities. So one collaborative initiative I want to share with you today is the University of Denver Indonesia Exchange Program in Museum Training, which grew out of my research on museum development in Indonesia, beginning in the early 1990s, and then later work with various community-based museum initiatives, such as the Nias Heritage Museum, which is on the island of Nias off the northwest coast of Sumatra, and then the Dayak Ika Women's Weaving Cooperative, which was the Dayaks are the indigenous people of Kalimantan, which is Indonesian Borneo. And so this was a weaving project that was started as a socioeconomic development program for them, and a revitalization of the weaving tradition, which is actually those textiles are quite well known, or among the many weaving traditions of Indonesia. So that project was based in West Kalimantan, Indonesian Borneo. And so although the program was initiated now 20 years ago, it lives on today in the form of ongoing professional and personal relationships, excuse me, with participants and stakeholders in Indonesia. And in fact, just last month, I was in West Kalimantan visiting one of the participants in the program. Her name is Novi Sagita. And so this program had two components. The first involved on-site training workshops at the Nias Heritage Museum, and then also in Sentang in West Kalimantan. And then I also, two graduate students from the Museum of Heritage Studies program at DU participated in this exchange and worked on those on-site, worked in the, with me, carrying out the workshops. So during the second part of the program, Novi Sagita and Nata Alui Duha from the Museum Pusaka Nias, or Nias Heritage Museum, came to Denver to take courses in anthropology and museum studies for 9 and 4 months, respectively. And a key principle of the exchange program was the idea of appropriate museology, or the idea that international museum and heritage training projects should be site and context specific and tailored to fit local cultural and socioeconomic contexts, drawing on and integrating into museum methods, local cultural knowledge and resources. And this, I came up with this idea of appropriate museology as an alternative to the kind of imposition of museum practices, for example, from United States or Europe, or a very Eurocentric museology, and imposing them on local cultures, which inadvertently erased local museological traditions. But also what I observed as very largely ineffective approaches to museum training in Indonesia that were usually top-down programs that were planned and designed and executed by outside international experts that come and do the transfer using this model like modernization back in the 1950s and 60s of transferring technology, transferring knowledge, which very rarely involve local people in the planning of the programs. And so over the years that I observed how these programs were very ineffective, and not only an expenditure of great significant sums of money, but also time and resources. So that was one of the motivations behind creating the program, was to experiment in alternative approaches to these kinds of training programs. So envisioned as it was not only envisioned as an experiment in appropriate museology, but also in intercultural curation and dialogue, and as to give participants an opportunity to experience museum cultures and ways of working in national and cultural contexts different from their own. And so the program also allowed participants to inhabit or to be both hosts and guests, and insiders and outsiders. And this position enabled them to sort of overcome or transcend all the divides, the dichotomies that we often experience in working internationally, such Western and non-Western, the global South and the global North, and all of these things that are perceptual categories that are divides and can be obstacles. So instead of seeing these as something differences to be overcome, the program was very much created to promote difference as something that's complementary, and viewing the participants were encouraged to view their work through this comparative lens, so that they could see how their approaches to their work were similar and different. What did they share in common, but also what they simply did not have in common. And that was just as important, and perhaps even more. So in addition to providing participants with new knowledge and skills and opportunities to make connections and to build professional networks, I saw how these kinds of interventions or programs can build a sense of community and a sense of purpose among participants that come from diverse backgrounds, and how they are part of a global community of cultural workers that have a common sense of, a common set of concerns and interests, that they're part of this, community of practice writ large on the global scale. So I've also learned how international cultural exchange and collaborative projects can be a platform for cultivating what the museum scholar Rhiannon Mason calls cosmopolitan museology, that encourages museum professionals, and by extension, museum visitors. Excuse me, I'm gonna drink here. My throat has been scratchy all day. It encourages museum professionals and visitors to step outside their own location and see the world through the eyes of others, and recognize that there's this plurality of worldviews out there. And cosmopolitan museology, she suggests, can also help foster the kinds of global perspectives and ways of being in the world that acknowledge connections and obligations to others beyond ourselves, our family, our nation, and even humans, to other species beyond humankind. So it inspires this really expansive view of community with a global and planetary reach. And I think we all can probably agree that such perspectives are needed in the world today, at a time in which many societies and countries, especially my own, are experiencing really alarming increases in nationalism, nativism, isolationism, xenophobia, racism, and discrimination, which more times than not hinge on a sense of threat or fear, a fear of others, and an intolerance of difference. So and I've had some conversations with colleagues about this, that some may see international cultural exchange as a luxury or indulgence today, as we become increasingly aware of the need to decrease our carbon footprints and redirect perceived limited resources, redirect them to meeting people's basic needs. And they may even seem superfluous when we have technology like we're using at this very moment to bring us together, to engage in dialogue, and to exchange experiences and views. So, but as an anthropologist, I believe that nothing can really replace unmediated, in-person, immersive encounters as facilitated through international cultural exchanges and collaborations, because it's such interventions that really represent an investment in the people who actually do the work of unlocking knowledge and fostering understanding through their research and exhibitions and educational programming and various kinds of community engaged practice. So investing in international exchange, I will argue, is still important in many ways. And if we look at it as in many regards, it is a kind of speculative enterprise. And like other kinds of investments that are speculative, we can never really know what their true impact is or what their long-term returns will be. I mean, I have had the benefit of this kind of longitudinal perspective, being at this kind of work for several decades now. But in many ways, it's a leap of faith, that these kinds of programs are important and will have an impact. And it's because we have to believe that they're one of the most powerful ways of preparing us to work in the museums of today, which have become very much these spaces of global encounter and hybridity and intercultural dialogue. And, I have no doubt that they will become even more so in the future. So that's it in terms of my pitch for continuing what we're doing here and engaging in dialogue and also, being physically present. I'm so grateful to be at the at ANU and the Humanities Research Center now to carry on this kind of in-person exchange. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Christina. Yeah, and I think I was reflecting as you were speaking on some of the teaching that I've done with museums, some of the richest and unexpected sort of engagements that came out of that was because of this international student body that we have, and we would prompt these conversations about sort of like why is the museum like this in Australia? It's like our National Museum is completely different to the Australian National Museum. It was always really I always valued that sort of hearing about those different ideas, even from students who are right at the start of their pathway of learning. So great. So we've got a bit of time for questions, about sort of 10 minutes. If people have questions, they can, if the audience has them, you're very welcome to pop them in the chat. But also, if anyone on the panel has a question for anyone else on the panel, sort of welcome you to unmute and ask a question of your fellow panelists. Yeah, please do.
For Dr. Pan, I'm curious about who you see as your primary audience and visitors for the museum. Who are and who do you see as potential visitors as well?
Well, basically every people, yeah, you know, museums are always open to all the audience. Yeah, you know. And most of the time, we got a lot of designers and also who do studies on ethnic costumes. Yeah. The background of this exhibition was actually that for most of the time, I mean, in a very long time, ethnic clothing were being regarded as kind of old-fashioned. Yeah. So yeah, so that's why we make this exhibition in a very modern way. That you can see basically all the exhibition halls were more like in our exhibition hall, not normally like a museum exhibition hall. So that's the way we try to invite people to appreciate the beauty of all kinds of clothes. Yeah, they look so different from all these so-called modern clothing, but they're still very beautiful. Yeah.
And is there interest with, I was just following on from that, is there interest with like young designers or new generations in actually taking ideas or modes of design from those traditional forms of clothing and incorporating them into modern fashion?
Yeah, basically, we invite in different in different cities, we invite like different designers from the local society, and if they were originally interested in this kind of clothing, if they make like their work relevant to this like they were inspired by these ethnic clothing, that we will invite them to the exhibition, like for this year's exhibition, we invite a designer from Kunming. She was born in Kunming and grew up in Guangdong. She graduated from the Central St. Martin Design School in London, and she was inspired by the local plants. She make very beautiful designs that they have a common shade with a local ethnic group, but use the new material. So we want to emphasize that the shape was actually very, very modern. Yeah. We don't really think there are very big gap between so-called traditional costume or fashion, like all these. The major difference was like the fashion industry was like they were developed they were produced in like factories. Yeah, we actually also emphasize the in all different ethnic groups, they very appreciate their own clothes and they they treasure their own clothes, not like us that like we bought new clothes basically every day. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question for you as well, Tammy. I was wondering about how you're create, because the beautiful renders of the building that's being created, but how are you creating the collections? Is that something that you're doing to have ready for the museum to open, or will it be an ongoing process after it opens?
Great question. Really great question. I think it will be an ongoing. We would like to open the museum with, you know, an exhibition of some description. And a wise woman once told me, thank you, Kylie, start small and then build out that way. So we've been doing this work in terms of collections for a couple of years now, for a few years. So we've been going out to community. There's a lot of oral histories. That's probably one of the big things that we have been collecting. So it's oral histories, but even the artifacts, we do have a very small catalogue of artifacts that people have donated to the museum already. And for us now, it's thinking about how do we store these things? You know, before it was an idea, and now this museum is being built. How do we store these artifacts that we've been given? But one of the key things about our collection, and as I mentioned in my presentation earlier, is that first generation are aging. some are going into aged care homes, some are passing on. And, you know, the message that we're trying to get out to community, especially their children, is when you clean out the houses, or when, you know, don't throw out that random whatever it is, because it might be an old something that's just been taking space in your home for, you know, 4 decades, but it could be something very meaningful and very important to our cultural history here. So that's, you know, we're doing a bit, you know, we've had campaigns on, you know, language radio, language media, in language media, to say, you know, hang on to these things if you think you have a story or things that you might like to donate or share with the museum, please contact us. And we have engaging and starting to engage with, it's all voluntary at the moment, so I probably should have mentioned that everything that has been done to date with the VMA, with the museum, the Vietnamese Museum, is we are all purely run by volunteers from our board through to our executive. To so it's going to be also about timelines, about looking at budgets and when can we start bringing in you know, interpreters and curators and things to start putting the exhibition together. And we've been floating the idea of maybe setting up a temporary or a mobile exhibition while we're waiting for the, you know, our physical space to be built, to give us a bit of a trial run and working with what we already have as well, to see how we can make it work and how we can curate what we have and what narrative we can set. And I think it's the biggest challenge, I think, is not the collections, it's the narratives, and it's the competing narratives that you have. And we've got not only cultural narratives, we've got intergenerational you know, complexities and nuances there as well. But yeah, so it will be ongoing, but we do anticipate that we will have a collection to, you know, an exhibition to open with.
Right. Yeah, no, it's amazing. Fascinating challenges. Yeah, please, Christina.
I wanted to follow up. Did you say competing narratives, Tammy? Did you say that there would be, and because that's something that people always talk about in creating community focused museums, is that, you know, no community is completely harmonious or everybody is in agreement, right? And so how you work through all of that is, you know, that you're to this point, you probably had to struggle maybe through a lot of those kind of conversations about narratives and what. Yeah, I just am curious about how you manage that.
I think, again, that's an ongoing, I think, piece of work there. Because of that generation, I think one of the big things is the generational narrative. And I think I mentioned it earlier, is how do you honor the stories of those people that we want to say without turning the Vietnamese museum into a war museum? It's not a war museum. I think that's the one thing to say, you know, our remit is not a war museum, but for a big portion of our community, I think that's how they perhaps perceive this to be, because this is their history and the trauma that they experienced. And while our second and third generation, you know, community really acknowledge and honor what, you know, our elders have done, they're like, well, we don't want to be stuck in the past either. We acknowledge and we thank you for your contributions and for getting us here, but what about what we've done in the last 10, 20 years, and what about our kids, and how are we going to showcase our culture for them in this space too? It's a very, very sensitive topic. It's very sensitive for a lot of people, for a lot of our community. It can be a little bit political. It can be, it's, you know, there's a lot of trauma involved, and, you know, so it's very emotional. And, you know, we are a community, but we're not homogenous. You know, within communities, you have different perspectives. So it is going to be an ongoing challenge. And we hope to overcome that through, we have a community advisory board. So that's made up of, you know, multi-faith leaders, so religious leaders, community leaders, from different, you know, states and territories, from business, from philanthropy, you know, that make up our advisory board. And we hope to utilize their expertise and their involvement in community to amplify the voices of the different, and then hopefully from there we can get those narratives, you know, or get them to understand that there is more than one narrative, that it's not a war museum. Yeah.
All right. Well, I had one question for you, Christina, and I was wondering what what's the focus of the work you're doing here in Canberra? Are you looking at sort of our national museums here, or is it a different project? Oh, you're just on mute.
I was just saying, of course, I will absorb and look and do, visit as many museums as I can. And I'm always interested and fascinated because my research has been the anthropological study of museums from a cross-cultural and comparative historical perspective. So wherever I go, I always have that antenna up. But the project here is to bring together, it's a collaborative project to work on a book idea that actually is Colin McCarthy a few years ago presented the idea to me and Bryony Anciel, I always mispronounce her last name, who is right now is in British Columbia, but works at Essex University in the UK, of creating some kind of handbook or I guess a compendium of text and materials on Indigenous, alternative, vernacular museology that going back, we're both, have worked pretty extensively on, Indigenous non-Western approaches to museums and museological, methods outside of a kind of Eurocentric model. And some of this work goes back to the 70s and 80s, but a lot of people, for example, students today, when they're writing about this, they have a kind of presentism about it, and that, we're just now talking about these kinds of things, and not because there's a lot of gray literature or things that have been not published widely, or just they're hard to find, hard to come across. And so bringing that literature together in some format and making it accessible and disseminating it, and then try to activate in some other kind of project, archival project, the knowledge that is in all of that material, with a more living, active project beyond just a book. And so bringing together Connell McCarthy and Athena Tamarapa, both from will be here next week, and to participate in the workshop, as well as Gilda Andrews, who's at the HRC, and then also Helena Kapuni Reynolds, who is Hawaiian, and he is one of my former students and is now just finished his PhD last week or 2 weeks ago, and is the associate curator for the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian, but he's based in Hawaii, and his job is to work on a community level with cultural heritage preservation in Hawaii. And then Helena and Bryony will be zooming in because they couldn't come. But at least 4 of us will be here in person to discuss and conceptualize. I mean, we're still at a very, the level of, we've started to actually collect, examples of, or make a list of possible texts and readings, but we're still at the stage of conceptualizing and thinking through, what should this be? Who is it for? What should it be called? It took us a long time to get to this point. We've been talking about it for a couple of years now. So we're really grateful that to have the opportunity to be here and see what happens. Where do we take it from here?
Right. I've put that event in the chat, so if anyone's interested in following up what it is. But yeah, thank you.
That talk will be, it's completely unknown to me what this is going to be about at this point, because we we'll see what comes out of the workshop.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, good luck with bringing it all
Mhm.
together, or getting it,
Mhm.
bringing those people together next week. So I think we're at time now, so we will finish up and thank our panel very much for your talks and for giving us an insight into the work you're doing within and in and around museums. And thank you to Kylie as well for organising and bringing us all together tonight under the umbrella of the Humanities Research Centre. And thanks to our audience for coming along to hear from us. So thank you, and have a good rest of your evening or day, depending on what time zone you're in. So thank you very much.